Hello, everyone. How's it going? Welcome back to another class session of food history. At any rate, what's on the menu for today? Oh, yeah, the Girl Scout cookies. Roman cheese? Beef stroganoff? Oh, there's so much I haven't seen yet. Nothing quite grabbing my attention, though. Oh, yeah. Disturbing origins of the cornflakes. Spiced hot chocolate. History of the chocolate chip cookie. All right, you have my attention, good sir.
Not all heroes wear capes. Some wear aprons. And I can think of no greater hero than Ruth Wakefield, inventor of the chocolate chip cookie. So today I'm going to be baking Ruth's original recipe from 1938, as well as her recipe for making cookies during World War II rationing. Then I can do a side-by-side tasting at the end. Chocolate chip cookies, this time on Tasting History. So there are lots of stories, mostly myths, about the invention of the chocolate chip cookie, but they all agree that it took place at the Toll House Inn in Whitman, Massachusetts in or just before 1938. 1938 is definitely when Ruth Wakefield, who ran the inn, printed the first recipe in her cookbook, Ruth Wakefield's Toll House Tried and True Recipes. Though she actually called them chocolate crunch cookies, which makes me think that they're going to be crispier than some of the chewy chocolate chip cookies that you can find today. So the recipe says, cream 1 cup butter, add 3/4 cup brown sugar, 3/4 cup granulated sugar, and 2 eggs beaten whole. Dissolve 1 teaspoon soda in 1 teaspoon hot water and mix alternately with 2 1/4 cups flour sifted with 1 teaspoon salt. Lastly, add 1 cup chopped nuts and 2 bars, 7 ounce, Nestle's yellow labeled chocolate, semi-sweet, which has been cut in pieces the size of a pea. Flavor with 1 teaspoon vanilla and drop half teaspoons on a greased cookie sheet. Bake 10 to 12 minutes in 375 degrees Fahrenheit oven, makes 100 cookies. So this recipe is not all that different from what you'll find on the back of a bag of chocolate chips from Nestle Toll House, or as Phoebe says,
Nestle Toll House.
The major differences are today they don't dissolve.
Wait, what? What was that? Hang on.
Chips from Nestle Toll House, or as Phoebe says,
Nestle Toll House.
The major differences are today they don't dissolve the baking soda into water and the nuts are very much optional. Also, you don't have to chop up the chocolate today because now we have chocolate chips which are made expressly for this purpose. In fact, you can't even get Nestle's chocolate bars anymore. I don't think that they sell them, so you gotta use the chips if you want to stick with the type of chocolate that she was using. Lastly, the size of these cookies is quite a bit different because she says this makes 100 cookies. So they're going to be pretty small because the modern recipe, which is about the same amount of dough, only makes between 50 and 60 cookies. So to make this original recipe, start by creaming the butter in a stand mixer until it's nice and smooth, and then add 3/4 cup brown sugar, 3/4 cup granulated sugar, 2 beaten eggs, the baking soda water, and the vanilla. Then add the 2 1/4 cups flour, which has the salt already whisked in. Mix this on the lowest speed until everything is just combined. And finally, add the cup of chopped nuts, I'm using walnuts, and the 14 ounces of chocolate chips, and mix until everything is just incorporated. Now you can of course do this by hand, but Ruth was using a stand mixer. Hers was a Hobart big stand mixer, but you can also do it by hand. Now the recipe doesn't say anything about chilling the dough, but in interviews, Ruth was very explicit in saying that the dough should be chilled overnight, so I'm going to follow her lead and do that. Now a few years later, the recipe had to change quite a bit because of the outset of World War II, or rather America entering the war in 1941-42, because rationing kicked in and it was hard to get some of the ingredients, especially the sugar. Yet there was an effort for home bakers to send these cookies by the boxful as care packages to the men on the front. As this ad states, "Dear Mom, the boys will make you an honorary general if you'll just send us more Toll House cookies." So what's a 1940s housewife to do? Well, luckily this ad also provided a recipe for Toll House cookies without sugar. So to make those, you just need to replace a few of the ingredients. You replace the butter with 1 cup of shortening, and replace the sugar with 3/4 cup strained honey and 3/4 cup maple syrup. The rest is pretty much the same. Start by creaming the shortening, honey, and syrup together, then add the 2 beaten eggs and 1 teaspoon of vanilla. Then whisk together 2 1/2 cups of sifted flour, that's a bit more than the other recipe, along with 1 teaspoon of salt and 1 teaspoon of baking soda. By this time, they've totally ditched mixing the soda with water. Gently mix that into the batter and then add the 1 cup of chopped nuts and the 14 ounces of chocolate chips. Again, I'm going to let this dough chill overnight. Now, once they are chilled, the recipe says to drop half teaspoonfuls of dough onto a baking sheet. But a half teaspoon measured out of dough, that's like 2 chocolate chips. It's just absolutely not enough, and it's going to leave you with far more than 100 cookies. So it's best to do this by weight. They're going to be about 14 grams a cookie or so. The other thing is, while the original dough is very easy to measure out and shape into a ball, the one made with the shortening, that's darn near impossible to measure because it's just so soft and sticky. Even after chilling it for 10 hours, it was still just really soft. You can't shape it into a ball, so I just kind of eyeballed it and plopped it on the baking sheet. Now these are going to be crunchy cookies. They're called chocolate crunch cookies after all, so you're going to expect them to spread quite a bit and get very thin, so leave about 2 inches between each cookie. Also, in later interviews, Ruth Wakefield said that she would press the cookies down, so that's what I'm going to do. Not sure that it's going to matter, but I'll follow her directions. Again, you really can't do that with the shortening version, so just leave them as is. But both get baked in the oven at 375 degrees Fahrenheit, 190 Celsius. Now, both of these recipes say to bake them for 10 to 12 minutes, and ovens were different back then. I have an old oven. There's a reason I don't use it. They're inconsistent. 10 and 12 minutes, that was too long for me. I ended up going with 9 minutes, and even then, they were still very, very dark. 10 minutes, they were burnt. So just keep an eye on them. You're looking for a nice golden brown color. And while you watch your cookies, let me tell you a little bit about the history of the chocolate chip cookie.
Okay. Time for history, as it
The
says.
year is 1938. Ruth Wakefield and her husband Kenneth have been running the Toll House Inn in Whitman, Massachusetts since 1930. And despite being the Great Depression, business was booming, and the inn was always packed with guests clamoring for Ruth's New England cuisine and delightful desserts.
Broiled live lobster, lobster thermidor, cold boiled lobster, lobster Newburgh, lobster salad. Lots of lobster. Broiled ten. Look at these prices. Damn. You would not find any of this for any of these prices. It's like slap on another 0 or something. And that's the price you would get today. That's pretty much it, though. Just slap on another price. They just have to slap on another 0 to the end of the price. And there you go. Modern day prices.
Ruth's menu was no stranger to praise. Restaurant critic Duncan Hines himself said that her Indian pudding was the kind of dessert that makes a fellow wish for hollow legs. Indian pudding being one of the oldest desserts in America, made from cornmeal, molasses, egg, and milk, so it's kind of like bread pudding but made with cornmeal. But even with the inn and restaurant doing so well, Ruth was never one to rest on her laurels, and she was always working on new recipes with her staff to wow her customers. Enter the chocolate crunch cookie. Now, there are many myths about how this cookie was created. Some say that she was actually working on a different cookie and ran out of nuts, so she added chocolate instead, though the recipe also calls for nuts, so I don't quite see how that works. Others say that she expected the chocolate to kind of melt through the entire cookie, making it a fully chocolate cookie. But since she was a trained home economics teacher and had been baking for years, she would have known that that was not going to happen, so that's a silly story. Perhaps the silliest is that the Hobart machine, the stand mixer, was shaking so much that it happened to knock some chopped chocolate off of a shelf into the dough, and she just kept going.
It's just like those, like cartoon situations, where something bumps into a shelf and then like one Rube Goldberg machine-esque event later, like stuff falls into the mixer. That's what this little, story sounds like. Oh, I did not double click.
It's kind of silly. No, the story is much more mundane than that. It was just that after a trip to Europe, she and her head pastry chef, Sue Brides, decided to come up with a new cookie. But it wasn't until 40 years later that she finally put these myths to rest, and she kind of leaned into some of the mythology of the cookie and of the Toll House itself. In her cookbook, she says, in August of 1930, Mr. Wakefield and I bought a lovely old Cape Cod house built in 1709 on the outskirts of Whitman, Massachusetts. At one time, it was used as a toll house where passengers ate, changed horses, and paid toll. Nope, that is not true. In fact, it wasn't built until like 1817 and had never been used as a toll house, but it made for a good story. It kind of held on to that colonial history, and they had already painted 1709 on the sign. What was true is that almost immediately after their creation, Toll House Chocolate Crunch cookies were a local hit. And she didn't try to keep the recipe to herself. She would actually hand out hand-typed cards with the recipe on it to different guests. And one of the first people to receive this card was a woman named Marjorie Husted, a name you might recall from the episode on Betty Crocker, because Marjorie Husted, at that time, for all intents and purposes, was Betty Crocker. And so shortly after coming up with the cookie, it was featured on the immensely popular Betty Crocker radio show. I can remember we hooked up a little radio in the kitchen and stood around listening to Betty Crocker tell about the Toll House and about the recipe for cookies. But what really made the cookie take off was the fact that the recipe was being reprinted in all these newspapers in New England. And in February of 1939, the Boston Globe reprinted it with one minor change. Instead of calling it a chocolate crunch cookie, they called it a chocolate chip cookie. Now, Ruth's recipe specifically calls for Nestle's chocolate, which at the time was sold in bars. But it turns out she actually wanted to use Baker's chocolate, which was produced not very far away in Massachusetts. But at the time of making the cookie, her wholesaler was out of Baker's chocolate, so she used Nestle's instead, and that turned out to be really fortunate for Nestle, because in 1939, they saw a 500% bump in sales of their semi-sweet chocolate in New England. And so they came a
500% just from this one, just from this one baker, like, and the recipe just spreading throughout New England. Damn. I wonder if that saved them somehow from some like financial turmoil.
Knocking on Ruth's door looking to get her official endorsement. And Ruth says that there were several chocolate companies that came a-courtin', but since she had already written the recipe using Nestle's, that's the one that she chose. And on March 20th, 1939, she gave the company the right to use her recipe and the Toll House name. And for this exchange, what did she get paid? I signed off for $1. Of course, you never see the dollar. Though it said she did receive free chocolate for life, still probably not a great business deal for old Ruth, but how was she to know? Now, as soon as Ruth had given the sign-off, Nestle began printing her recipe on the back of every semi-sweet chocolate bar, and soon they realized that the only reason people were buying this chocolate was to make it into the cookies, so instead of having to chop it up, they scored the chocolate bar into 160 tiny little pieces, and then in December of 1940, they figured, well, let's just break them up in the factory, and they introduced the teardrop-shaped chocolate morsel. What with all of American manhood from 6 to 60 clamoring for cookies with small bits of their favorite flavor, chocolate, flecking them throughout, this simple device is a boon to the hurried homemaker. No more sitting around having to break up chocolate into tiny little pieces, because the chocolate morsel or chocolate chip was here to stay. But in World War II, even the company sometimes had trouble getting a hold of sugar, so they'd had to make some alterations to the chocolate chips, which made them very, very hard to eat. One executive even admitted that people had complained of chipping their teeth on the chocolate chips.
Say what? I don't think I've ever heard of anyone, like, damaging their teeth trying to eat chocolate before. What would cause chocolate to become so hard? Like, seriously. Like, a lack of sugar, a lack of milk, a lack of what?
But regardless, chocolate chip cookies became one of the most popular baked goods to be baked at home and then sent in care packages to the front. Now that Nestle's semi-sweet chocolate is harder to get because so much of it is going to the fighting forces in emergency and combat rations, put it to the best possible use. Make a batch of these golden brown, crunchy Toll House cookies and send them to that soldier boy of yours. As it said, much of the chocolate that America was producing at the time was already being sent overseas in the form of the D ration. Though much of these chocolate bars were of a lower quality and tough to chew, so a home-baked chocolate chip cookie, even if it was a few weeks old by the time it got to you, was definitely preferred. This is probably why they became so popular, because as people started coming back from World War II, they associated good feelings with this chocolate chip cookie. This led to multiple companies putting out their own version of chocolate chips, and in the 1950s, Nestle introduced a Toll House cookie mix. This was followed by them and Pillsbury making a completely pre-made cookie dough served in a tube, which is still the best way to eat it. Like, don't even bake it, just straight out of the tube. Other companies began selling already baked chocolate chip cookies, most famously the 1963 introduction.
Oh my god, this stupid mouse. I just wanted to click once. It double clicks for some reason. Was that the first, like, instance of, like, the pre-made, like, cookie dough and all that? Wait, what year did he say? What year did he say?
House cookie mix. This was followed by them and Pillsbury making a completely pre-made cookie dough served in a tube, which is still the best way to eat it. Like, don't even bake it, just straight out of the tube. Other companies began selling already baked chocolate chip cookies, most famously the 1963 introduction of Chips Ahoy. Now, while chocolate chip cookies have become one of America's most beloved creations, sadly, the location of its creation is no more. Ruth Wakefield and her husband sold the Toll House in the 1960s, but in 1984 it burned down, and today it's a Wendy's. But the Toll House legacy lives
Oh, that sucks. It got, wait, burned down from what? Like a storm? Did some lightning hit it? Was it arson? And now it's a Wendy's? Damn.
on in Massachusetts, and in 1997 the state legislature decided to name a state cookie, an official state cookie, and of course the chocolate chip cookie was going to get it, except that the governor, William Weld, was a fan of the Fig Newton, which was also invented in Massachusetts. But a state representative and former employee of the Toll House decided that she was going to start a campaign for the Toll House cookie being the official state cookie. And she was smart and got all the kids of the state on board. So they came up with wonderful slogans like, "When was the last time your mother baked you a warm batch of Fig Newtons?" And "Fig Newtons are a form of self-punishment." Well, after the results of a phone poll showed that the Toll House cookie was clearly the winner, William Weld decided to relent and name the Toll House chocolate chip cookie the state cookie, and the Fig Newton got the title of state fruit cookie.
A cookie is just a cookie, but Newtons are fruit and cake.
And the kids were not wrong. You don't
Who I don't even know if I've ever had a Fig Newton. But who would choose that over a chocolate chip cookie?
really bake Fig Newtons at home, and you definitely do bake chocolate chip cookies at home, as I am, and the smell is wonderful. So I think it's about time to take them out the oven. So once they've baked, take them out of the oven and let them cool on a sheet for 5 minutes, then transfer them to a cooling rack and let them cool until room temperature. And here we are, the original chocolate chip cookie and their World War II ration-friendly counterpart. So they're definitely smaller than most that you would find today. I guess it's about the size of a Chips Ahoy, but it's also a lot darker. And I think that is not due to time in the oven as much as due to just the brown sugar versus white sugar ratio. But they smell really good, and lots of big chocolate chunks, and lots of nuts as well. Let's give it a go. Crunchy.
You can hear it. You can hear it. It's crunchy.
I mean, it's a chocolate chip cookie. What's not to like? I wouldn't know that this was any different than the modern version. You know, I mean, it's all the regular ingredients. Not a lot has changed. So maybe it's time to try out the World War II version here, which is considerably more spread out because the dough was just so liquidy. But it's also made it so all the chocolate pieces, you can tell better here, are kind of in the center, and they're all like that. The chocolate chips haven't spread as much. Let's give it a try. So they're softer. They're good. They just aren't nearly as sweet. But there's like an extra flavor in there. That has to be from the maple syrup. It kind of reminds me of the flavor of like Raisin Bran a little bit, but with chocolate.
Raisin Bran?
They're actually quite good. And the texture is, it's not as crunchy, but it's really light. They're like almost pillowy. Which would I choose? I'm gonna go with the original, I think. It's just a little sweeter. But this, not as bad as I was expecting. I'm surprised, pleasantly so. So now we call these cookies here in the US, but in the UK they might refer to them as biscuits. And a little while ago I filmed an episode with the boys over at Sorted Food where I tried several different British biscuits and talked about their history, so I will put a link to that video in the description, and I will see you next time on Tasting History.
Be sure to like and subscribe. Hot Dr. Pepper? What the hell? JFK's last meal? Oh boy. Lighthouse corn chowder. Oh yeah, the Betty Crocker one. I remember that. Ancient Roman pizza. Fettuccine Alfredo. Yo, let's do it.
Today, when you order fettuccine alfredo at a place like the Olive Garden, you can expect a bowl of pasta drenched in a creamy and garlicky sauce. And delicious it is. But Italian? It ain't. No, the original Italian version of fettuccine alfredo is altogether different and doesn't have any cream at all. So thank you to HelloFresh for sponsoring this video as we make my favorite way to put on weight, fettuccine alfredo, the original recipe. This time on Tasting History. So fettuccine alfredo, or fettuccine all'alfredo, is a dish that has been made for so long that its origins are really lost to the mists of time. But the version that we know here in the US gets its name from Roman restaurateur Alfredo di Lelio. And it is his version of the dish that I endeavor to recreate. Now, he never actually wrote down the recipe per se, or at least shared it, but in 1927 he did give away the secret to his dish. And it was to use the best ingredients to make his fettuccine, then a double quantity of butter and cheese, and well mixed. That is my secret. And if you're thinking, well, there has to be more than just that, no, there doesn't seem to be, because his restaurant, or rather restaurants, are still in operation today and say that they still make it the way that they made it then, and they say that's all there is to this iconic dish. So to make the pasta, what you'll need is 2 cups or 250 grams of Italian pasta flour, sometimes called 00 flour, 2 cups or 250 grams of fine semolina flour, and 6 large eggs. Now, can you just buy dried pasta, you ask? Well, yes you can. But since Alfredo used fresh pasta, that is what I'm endeavoring to make, but I have nothing against dried pasta. I had some last night when I made a big bowl of chicken sausage spaghetti bolognese from today's sponsor, HelloFresh. HelloFresh makes making dinner so much easier because everything gets delivered right to your door, so I don't have to. Is that you can swap in different ingredients like your sides or your Tasting History 50 at HelloFresh.com. Now, unlike the dried pasta that I got from HelloFresh, this is how you'll make your fresh pasta. Pour out the 2 flours onto a clean workspace and then mix them together. Once well mixed, create a well in the center where you can add all of your eggs. Then, trying not to make a mess, begin incorporating the flour into the eggs. And once all of the ingredients are incorporated, you should have a shaggy dough that you can start kneading by hand for 7 to 8 minutes. Keep kneading the dough until you have a nice smooth ball, then wrap it either in a damp cloth or some plastic wrap and leave it in a cool place to rest for about a half an hour. Now, in the summer, in my house, there aren't a lot of cool places, so I put it in the fridge, which works just as well. After 30 minutes, take it out and cut it into pieces. I cut mine into 3 pieces, but I would suggest cutting it into 6 pieces. It's just going to make it a lot easier when you are rolling it out. And to roll it out, you can either use a hand-cranked roller or one like the one that I have, which attaches to a stand mixer. I just got the new KitchenAid. It's red, it's beautiful, and the reason that I got it was because I dropped the old one on the floor. And luckily it didn't fall on my foot, but it did break the KitchenAid stand mixer, and yeah, I was devastated.
F's in chat for the KitchenAid stand mixer. 2006 to 2023. Ye shall be missed.
We've been through a lot together. Also, a little story about the shirt that I am wearing in that video. So when I was on book tour shilling the Tasting History cookbook back in May, at one of the signings, someone stood up and said, "I've been watching you since almost the very beginning. You had me at garum," referring to the episode on garum, the fermented Roman fish sauce that kind of got this channel started. And I just loved that so much that I decided to put it on a t-shirt. And I had one made for myself, and you can buy them if you want. I'll put a link in the description. Anyway, to use this thing, press your piece of dough down a bit and sprinkle it with flour. The key to making this whole process work is by having plenty of flour on that dough. You don't want it sticky at any point, or else it'll stick to the rollers and you'll get holes and it'll just be a big old mess. So use more flour than you think. Then set the rollers to the widest setting. On mine, it is a 1, and then you're going to pass the dough through, then fold it in half or in thirds depending on the size of the pasta, and pass it through again. And you want to repeat this at least 3 times, but you could do it 7 or 8 times. Once it's nice and smooth and uniform, then you can start tightening the roller. Just 1 notch at a time, passing the pasta through once each time you tighten it. And again, make sure to use plenty of flour so the pasta doesn't stick to the rollers, and you can make it pretty much as thin as you want. I'm going with either a 5 or a 6, but you can get it up to like a 7 or an 8 to get it really, really thin. Just know that the thinner it gets, the harder it is to work with. But once it's as thin as you want it, run it through the machine on the fettuccine cutting setting. Once all of your pasta is cut, set it aside and boil.
There's a fettuccine cutting setting on his pasta roller thing, okay? Okay. That's a thing, I guess. I mean, I'm not exactly a big expert in the culinary world or KitchenAid stand mixers, but okay.
Boil a pot of water, about 3 quarts. And while it heats, you can get your other ingredients ready. So for every ½ pound of pasta that you're going to be making, what you'll need is 100 grams or 1 cup of Parmigiano Reggiano, freshly grated on the finest grater you have. And being freshly grated is imperative. If you use pre-grated Parmesan cheese, it's not going to work because they add fillers that make it so it doesn't clump, but it also makes it so it's not going to incorporate with the butter and you're just going to have a big old mess. And then 4 tablespoons or 55 grams of unsalted butter at room temperature. And you're going to put that in a bowl that is also either room temperature or just ever so slightly warm. And you'll also need a little bit of the pasta water that you're going to be boiling the pasta in. So you got your pasta, you got your butter, and you got your cheese. But before we put them all together to make this fettuccine Alfredo, I think I need to tell you who Alfredo was.
Time for history.
Picture it. Italy, 1908. A young man, Alfredo Di Lelio, frets over the health of his young wife, Ines, who is pregnant with their first child. Unfortunately, Alfredo doesn't know what to do because he's not a doctor, and he doesn't know how to help his wife. The only thing he does know how to do is make pasta. So, after praying to Saint Anne, protector of pregnant women, Alfredo goes into the kitchen and whips up a bowl of pasta with butter and Parmesan cheese. and gives it to his wife, who absolutely loves it, and I guess got her strength back because a couple months later she gave birth to Armando, or Alfredo II. On top of that, in 1914, when they opened a restaurant called Ristorante Alfredo on the Via della Scrofa in Rome, she suggested putting the dish on the menu. The thing is, pasta with butter and cheese isn't really restaurant menu worthy, because in Italy, that dish was known as something that you'd whip up if you weren't feeling very well, just kind of like a comfort food. And it was usually just called fettuccine al burro, or fettuccine with butter. It wasn't new, it wasn't inventive, and it had probably been made in most Italian households at least since the Middle Ages. In fact, a recipe for basically this dish appears in Maestro Martino's 15th century Libro de Arte Cucinari.
15th century? So, what could be considered fettuccine alfredo is 500, 600 years old? Huh.
And his recipe is for long, thin strips of pasta mixed with cheese and butter, and the only real difference is that he would put sweet spices on it, like sugar and nutmeg and cinnamon, because it was the Italian Renaissance and they put that stuff on absolutely everything. The other difference was the name, because in Maestro Martino's time, fettuccine, the term, had not come into use, and so instead it's called macaroni romaneschi, or Roman macaroni. But even by the 20th century, by Alfredo's time, the term macaroni was still sometimes used just to refer to any pasta at all that was long and thin. But even with the name change to fettuccine, the dish that Alfredo made his sick wife is still pretty much the same dish that people had been making for centuries. So if Alfredo's pasta was not inventive or unique, why was it such a big deal? Well, the answer is Alfredo himself, because when you went to his restaurant, you weren't just getting served a bowl of pasta, you were getting a show starring Alfredo. The waiters shout, "Alfredo is coming!" The room goes dark. The king comes dancing under a spotlight's beam. Gold fork and spoon serve as his scepter. "I am king of the fettuccine," and every waiter in the dining room stands at attention. Now that is a description of Alfredo's performance in 1952 after he had become...
So Alfredo dramatizes, he kind of like hams it up just to make a show of serving the fettuccine? I guess that's how you stand out in the restaurant world.
A phenomenon. But even before the worldwide fame, people went to his restaurant in Rome for those noodles. His noodles were famous, especially with tourists. In Sinclair Lewis's 1922 novel Babbitt, a character planning a trip to Rome is asked if while she's there she's going to attend concerts and enjoy the art and culture and music that Rome has to offer. And she says, "No, what I really go for is there's a little trattoria on the Via della Scrofa where you get the best fettuccine in the world." And when two of the greatest film stars of the 1920s, Mary Pickford and Douglas Fairbanks, visited Rome for their belated honeymoon, they dined at Alfredo's and fell in love with the pasta so much that it said that they went back every single day of their time in Rome. And when it was finally time for them to leave the city, they gifted Alfredo a pair of golden utensils, a fork and a spoon engraved with "To Alfredo, the King of the Noodles," July 1927. There's a story that during World War II, people would give up their gold to the government to help pay for the war effort. And should you not do so voluntarily, then Mussolini would send the Carabinieri, or the National Police, to come get it from you. Well, the coppers eventually got around to Mr. Alfredo. "The fettuccine fork and spoon, if you please," they said. Alfredo wept. He pleaded. He got on his knees and swore it would ruin the tourist trade. The Carabinieri gave him a couple of licks to teach him patriotism. They took the fork and spoon. Next day, however, they came back. They handed him the fork and spoon. "Thanks to God," cried Alfredo, "Roman culture is saved." "Keep it," said the cops. "Gold plate." Alfredo, of course, never accepted the fact that they were just gold plate and always insisted that they were indeed pure gold. Now, with the approval of Hollywood royalty, it
Wow. All that happened just to find out it was gold plated and not gold.
was time that Alfredo got the approval of his own government. And in 1927, he was knighted for his fettuccine. And afterwards, on the restaurant menus, it said Alfredo, Cavaliere delle Fettuccine. Alfredo, Knight of the Fettuccine. And foreign newspapers wrote that indeed the two most discussed byproducts of modern Italian are fascismo and fettuccine. Quite the pair. But it was the fascismo and not the fettuccine that dragged Italy into World War II, which unsurprisingly devastated the tourism trade and made it very difficult to get good quality ingredients for the pasta. And so in 1943, Alfredo decided to hand in his golden spoon and golden fork and retire. And he left the restaurant in the care of his son Armando. And then just a few years later, in 1946, they decided to sell it altogether to two of their employees. So that's the end of Alfredo's story, right? No. Because, as I said, Alfredo was a showman. And the restaurant was his stage, and he craved that limelight. And so in 1950, when Italy's tourism trade came roaring back, he decided to open a new restaurant. But he couldn't just name it Alfredo because that was already taken by the restaurant that he had once owned and sold to his employees. And there were a lot of other Alfredo restaurants that had popped up because they were trying to cash in on his name. So instead, he named it Il Vero Alfredo, the true Alfredo. And it was sort of a shady move because it was only a 7-minute walk from that original restaurant he owned, which was still selling the pasta that he had made famous, and now he's doing the same thing 7 minutes away. But the thing is, people came to that new restaurant because they weren't just going for the pasta, they were going for Alfredo. You went to the restaurant to see
JFK?
how he prepared the pasta, and it kind of reminds me how people would go to Caesar's in Tijuana just to see how Caesar himself would make his famous salad. And I did a whole video on that, so if you haven't seen that, I'll make that pop up after this one and I'll put a link in the description. But suffice it to say, the owners of that original Alfredo's restaurant were none too happy with the new Alfredo's restaurant, and it kind of started a feud that, according to many, still is going on to this very day. And in 1952, a newspaper talked about Alfredo's reaction to being questioned whether the true pasta, the true fettuccine Alfredo, was at that original restaurant or if it was at his new restaurant. His mustachio vibrates with indignation. He shows you a calloused spot on his right palm. That is caused by the spoon. A callus on his upper third finger, left hand. That is the mark of the fork. Scars earned by tossing the noodles 47 years long. Fortunately, both restaurants have been able to cash in both on the pasta and on the name and are still in business today, owned by the same families who owned them in the 1950s. What's interesting, though, is that the name Fettuccine Alfredo, while it took off worldwide, never took off in Italy, at least not outside of Rome, because most of Italy still calls it Fettuccine al burro, or, my favorite, Pasta dei cornuti, or cuckold's pasta. See, the story goes that a woman was having multiple affairs and would be with all of her lovers all day, so that when she got home, she didn't have any time left to make him a big meal. So she would just boil some pasta and throw on some butter and some Parmesan cheese, which is exactly what I'm about to do right now. So add a little salt to your boiling water and then add in your pasta. Now, if it's fresh pasta, it might take 1 to 3 minutes to cook, depending on how thin you were able to get your pasta. Mine took about 90 seconds, but if it's dried pasta, then it can take up to 10 minutes. Alfredo does say that this pasta should be al dente, so don't overcook it. As soon as it's cooked, pull it straight from the pot into the dish with the butter, then sprinkle it with about 1/3 of the Parmesan cheese and start tossing it, coating the noodles with the butter as it melts. This is really the trick to getting a creamy sauce without using any cream, and a 1937 article describes how Alfredo himself did it, and it was with a flair. In serving fettuccine, Alfredo's goes in for as much style as a Hollywood opening. A waiter comes solemnly up to your table carrying a steaming bowl of cooked noodles, like a high priest with a special offering. Then arrives Alfredo himself with a dish of freshly grated Parmesan cheese and a plate of unsalted butter. With reverential grace, the spoon in his right hand, the fork in his left, he mixes and remixes the cheese and butter through the noodles, tossing them up in higher and higher loops every twist. People said it was like watching a great dancer or a juggler with noodles, and it is known that he used his golden spoon and fork, yet in so many pictures he's shown manhandling the pasta with his hands. Yummy. Regardless, I do not have his technique, so I am keeping it low and in the bowl. As you continue to toss it, add in a bit more cheese as well as some of the pasta water to help thicken it up. The starch from the pasta in the water is what's going to give this a sauce-like texture. And as the article says, 2 minutes of mixing and the platters are served. Add a little more Parmesan and a crack of black pepper, and here we are. The original fettuccine all'Alfredo. I can tell right away that this is going to be very, very different from a fettuccine Alfredo that you would typically get in an American restaurant today, because it just smells so different. Really, the smell that I'm getting is the Parmesan. I mean, there's a lot in here, so I'm guessing it's going to taste like it as well. But here we go. It's so simple, but that's so delicious. And the pasta is done perfectly. You want a little bit of a bite to it. You want it al dente. But really, at first you just get butter. It's like this creaminess. It is like a creamy sauce, even though there's no cream in it. And then you get hit by the cheese. And that, if you don't like Parmesan cheese, you're not going to like this. It is so cheese forward that I could see maybe backing it off a little bit if you wanted to, but that is supposed to be kind of the dominant flavor, and I'm fine with it because I love cheese. This is excellent. Now, like I said, even if you don't want to make your own noodles from scratch, you can make this pasta using dried noodles, and it's going to take you like 5 minutes to do the entire dish. So there's really little excuse not to do it unless you don't like cheese, and then make something else. But if you like cheese, make this version of fettuccine Alfredo, and I will see you next time on Tasting History. I'm going to eat this whole bowl.
The original Caesar salad from Mexico. Alright.
Hail Caesar, Emperor of Salads and ruler of Mexico. That's right. The Caesar salad was actually invented in Tijuana, Mexico. And I'm going to do my best to make that original version of my...
I feel like I've been lied to this entire time. Also, hello, Michael. How's it going? Did you know that the Caesar salad is Mexican in origin? Alright, I'm hydrating. 1 second. I got some gamer subs.
Favorite salad from the 1920s. So thank you to Wondrium for sponsoring this video as we make the original Caesar salad. Maybe. This time on Tasting History. So like so many dishes out there and lots of cocktails as well, lots of people in different places have tried to take credit for inventing the Caesar salad. Most people do agree that it was made first in Tijuana, Mexico, but even then, there's still a lot of controversy about exactly how it all went down, probably in the 1920s. And the first written version wasn't done until the 1940s. It's from a 1946 article called The Voice of Broadway. The big food rage in Hollywood, the Caesar salad, will be introduced to New Yorkers by Gilmore's Steakhouse. It's an intricate concoction that takes ages to prepare and contains, zowie, lots of garlic, raw or slightly coddled eggs, croutons, romaine, anchovies, Parmesan cheese, olive oil, vinegar, and plenty of black pepper. But she's not describing that original Tijuana salad there. She is describing a version that was going to be made in New York. And they're very similar, but there are some key differences, most notably anchovies. That's right, the original Caesar salad, by all accounts, did not have anchovies. In fact, its purported creator, Caesar, who it's named after, was rather insistent that there were no anchovies. Instead, he had Worcestershire sauce added and said that all the anchovy flavor necessary came from that. So in an effort to make the original Caesar salad based on his recollections as well as those of his daughter, what you'll need is about 2 cups of cubed day-old Italian bread, 2 cloves of crushed garlic, and 3 to 4 tablespoons of olive oil. So that is for the croutons. And if you have a little bit too much bread or not quite enough or too much garlic or whatever, it doesn't matter. All of the ingredients in this recipe are kind of up to you, up to your taste. Even today they make it tableside at the restaurant where it was originally done. And they're just throwing things in. Nobody's doing any measurements, so you don't need to either. For the dressing, you'll need 2 cloves of garlic crushed, 2/3 cup or 160 milliliters or more of extra virgin olive oil. And on Caesar's insistence, that olive oil does need to be imported from Italy. Granted, he's not here, so if you don't have that, it doesn't really matter. But he also says the same thing about the 1/4 cup or about 25 grams of freshly grated Parmigiano Reggiano cheese. Then 2 medium heads of romaine lettuce, a half teaspoon of kosher salt, 1 large egg yolk, plenty of fresh ground black pepper, the juice of 1 lime. So a lot of people actually use lemon instead of lime, and that probably stems from a translation error, because in Mexico they call limes limon. And so, Americans heard limon and thought, oh, lemon, and so now it's usually lemon, but it should be a lime. And then 2 tablespoons of Worcestershire sauce. And that word, Worcestershire, I feel like it causes a lot of stress, especially with Americans. Nobody ever says it with a lot of gusto. It's like Worcestershire. And I feel like most of the confusion comes from the first part of the word. Worcester is pronounced Worcester, because no English place name ever sounds the way that it's written. Beaver Castle, Chumley. It's something that really stresses me out when I go to Britain, which, when this episode airs, I will actually be in Scotland. So, to prepare myself for the eventual embarrassment of pronouncing things wrong, but to try to get better, as well as to help plan my trip, I have been watching The Great Tours on Wondrium, who happens to be our sponsor. Wondrium, formerly the Great Courses Plus, never fails, around rating for about another 100 years. So next time you're planning a trip, or frankly any time you want to learn pretty much /tasting history. Now let's make this salad.
What if the olive oil is experienced and not virgin? I guess it'll have to do. You gotta make do with what you got.
So first, take the romaine lettuce and cut off the base. Then strip away the outer leaves until you get to the nice crisp romaine hearts. You'll need about 20 of them in all. Then wash them well and then put them into the refrigerator for at least an hour uncovered so that they dry out and get nice and chilled. Now for both the croutons and the salad itself, you want to get a very big bowl. They use a big wooden bowl at the restaurant. It doesn't need to be wooden, but you want it big because you're gonna make a mess otherwise. You can do it in smaller bowls, but you can do everything all in one bowl and have less to wash. Now when it comes to the croutons, the restaurant today, they give you like one big crouton on top. It's cool looking, but not very practical in my personal opinion. So luckily, the original seems to have been much smaller, more traditional croutons. So to make those, mix the garlic with the 3 to 4 tablespoons of olive oil and add a pinch of salt and a crack of pepper if you want. Then add in the bread and gently toss it until it's well coated. Then spread it out over a lined baking sheet and put it in the oven at 375 degrees Fahrenheit or 190 Celsius for about 15 to 20 minutes. And if you want, you can flip them over during the time, but I actually haven't found it entirely necessary, but you'll just want to make sure that they get nice and crispy. Then in the same bowl, add the other half of the garlic and the Worcestershire sauce, the cracked pepper, the egg yolk, the fresh lime juice, kosher salt, and mix everything together. Then while you're stirring, slowly drizzle the olive oil in. It should just be a thin thread of olive oil constantly going into the bowl. Then add the Parmesan cheese and mix that in. And finally take the dry hearts of romaine and put them in the bowl and begin to coat them by gently turning them over and over in the dressing. So this is when the big bowl really comes in handy, otherwise you're going to be splashing Caesar dressing all over yourself, especially if you have a lot of leaves in there. And if you do have a lot of leaves, it also takes a little while to kind of make sure that they're all coated. So while Max from 20 minutes ago does that, Max from right now is going to tell you the history of Caesar salad.
Time for history.
So deciding who actually invented the Caesar salad is a little rough. There are several claimants, but most historians agree that the salad takes its name from Caesar's Restaurante Bar in Tijuana, Mexico. The restaurant was opened in 1923 by an Italian immigrant named Cesar Cardini. Interestingly enough, he actually sailed over to America in May of 1913 on the RMS Olympic, sister ship of the Titanic, which had sunk just a year previous. And it makes you wonder, if he had sailed over just a year earlier, would we have the Caesar salad? Anyway, after working in several restaurants in Sacramento and San Diego, he decided to open up his own place, and he chose Tijuana for the location. Because with prohibition in full swing in the States, people were flocking over the border each day to partake in a bit of recreational drinking. On top of that, gambling was actually legal in Mexico at the time, so this city right across the border was basically like the Las Vegas of the 1920s. But even though the location of the first Caesar salad is pretty well established, who made it is not so clear, because a lot of people who worked there in those early days have laid claim to actually being the one to invent it. There was Livio Santini, who in 1924, at the age of 18, moved from Italy to Tijuana, where he worked as a cook at Caesar's restaurant. See, according to him, during World War I, his family was put in a refugee camp in Austria, and while they were there, his mother would make what was called hard times salad, though I'm assuming in Italian. And basically, it was a salad that she would make with whatever she had available. It was olive oil, Worcestershire sauce, wine vinegar, Parmesan, and on occasion, an egg. And so he made that same salad when he started working at the restaurant. And he says that Caesar eventually started making it tableside and kind of took credit for the salad, and that's why it was named the Caesar salad. But to believe that, you would also have to believe that a boss would take credit for something their employee did, and I don't see that happening. But the most accepted story does lie with Cardini himself. According to his daughter, it was a busy 4th of July weekend in 1924, and the restaurant saw every item on the menu 86th, meaning that they ran out of it in restaurant speak. Well, the hungry Americans, many of whom were rich, famous, and drunk, were clamoring to be fed. So Cardini, in a tizzy, goes back into the kitchen and just grabs whatever ingredients are left and decides to put something together. But the dish wasn't that spectacular, so he had a bit of a flair for the dramatic, so he decided to take a cart out into the dining room and actually put the dish together right there in front of everything. And he named it the Caesar salad, or Caesar's salad. So that's the story that he told his daughter, and it very well could be true. Though I have worked in a lot of restaurants and with a lot of restaurant owners, and the way that I imagine it probably happened was it was very busy, he was frazzled, and he went into the kitchen and went to his cook and said, "Hey, what do we have? What can we put together?" His cook said, "Hey, we can do this, make this salad." And he goes out of the dining room, he makes it, and he says, "Oh, I made this." But who knows, maybe I'm just a cynic. Regardless of how it actually happened, Caesar's name did end up on that salad. But that might not actually be the Caesar salad that ended up becoming really popular, because shortly after its creation, Caesar's brother Alex came to work at the restaurant. Alex took that salad and added in some anchovies and possibly some Dijon mustard, and he changed the way that it was served. Originally, it was served basically big pieces of lettuce with the stems on the outside in a circle on a plate, and then everybody took it by hand and ate it kind of like a lettuce wrap or something. And, he was like, well, people don't like eating salad with their hands, I imagine. And so he said, no, we're going to get this with forks. This new method of serving, along with the anchovies and maybe some other ingredients added, became known as the aviator's salad because Alex had been quite the pilot in World War I. And eventually, story goes that it became far more popular than the Caesar salad, so Caesar changed the name of the aviator's salad to the Caesar salad. And yeah, I believe that because it's all about Caesar. But this is the salad that movie stars like W.C. Fields and Clark Gable popularized. And Caesar's became the place to be seen. And years later, the great Julia Child wrote, "One of my early remembrances of restaurant life was going to Tijuana in 1925 or 1926 with my parents, who were wildly excited that they should finally lunch at Caesar's restaurant. My parents, of course, ordered the salad. Caesar himself rolled the big card up to the table, tossed the romaine in a great wooden bowl, and I wish I could say I remembered his every move, but I don't. It was a sensation of a salad from coast to coast, and there were even rumblings of its success in Europe." And you're welcome for not making you listen to that entire thing in my Julia Child impression. Now, legend has it that the way that the salad got to Europe was via Wallis Simpson, future wife of King Edward VIII, once he abdicated, of course. She's also often credited for being the one to request that it be cut up into smaller pieces of lettuce, making it easier and a little bit more dainty to eat with a fork, and frankly, I'm all about that. And even the master chefs of the International Society of Epicures in Paris voted the Caesar salad as the greatest recipe to originate from the Americas in 50 years. And I am tempted to agree with them, except that I have not tried this version of the salad, and so I reserve judgment until I have done so. So once you've coated the romaine in the dressing, set several pieces on a chilled plate and top with a bit more Parmesan cheese and the croutons. And here we are, one possible version of the original Caesar salad. I do have to say, eating like huge leaves like this, kind of weird. I agree with Wallis Simpson or whoever decided that it needed to be cut up because it needs to be cut up. But what doesn't need to be cut up are the croutons. I'm going to try one of those first because I freaking love croutons.
Crunchy.
Now that is some crunch. Those are fantastic. I mean, there's just a little bit of garlic, like that hint of garlic, but it's not overwhelming. It's not like garlic bread, but a little bit like garlic bread. Now for the salad itself, I could use a fork, be a little bit more civilized, but originally you picked up the whole thing of lettuce, so that's what I'm going to do. Here we go. It's actually pretty easy to eat that way. It's really nice. It's super light. Like, I mean, obviously there's a ton of oil in it, but it doesn't feel oily. It feels really light, and there is this spice to it that I usually don't find in many modern Caesar salads. Usually I feel like, because I like a creamy Caesar probably, so it's much more subtle. I think it's coming from that Worcestershire sauce, but it doesn't taste like anchovies at all. So if you really like the flavor of anchovies, you'll want to add anchovy paste or chopped up anchovies. But this is really great. I don't think it really needs the anchovies. It's just different, I suppose. So especially compared to like just a plain vinaigrette, and if you look at salad dressing recipes from like the late 1900s, early 20th century, they're all pretty basic. This actually is a real step up, so I can see why it really caught on and was so popular. So I think that this version of the salad is really perfect for summer. Like I said, it's really nice and light. You could put some chicken on it or whatever to spruce it up, but really it doesn't need it. It's a whole meal on itself. I feel like I could eat all 20 leaves of lettuce. That's how light it is. Anyway, make sure to follow me on Instagram, Tasting History with Max Miller. Also, check out our second channel, Catch Up with Max and Jose. We do some behind the scenes stuff, a little bit more about like my personal life and all that kind of stuff. Nothing too salacious, but yeah. Anyway, check it out. I'll put a link in the description, and I will see you next time on Tasting History.
Huh. I never would have thought the Caesar salad was from Mexico. I genuinely always thought it was like some sort of reference to Julius Caesar. decisions, decisions. Oh, the Great Molasses Flood. I remember that. Coffee was illegal. I vaguely remember that. History of mac and cheese. Oh yeah, there it is. The Caesar salad thing. Oh yeah, the ketchup thing. Alright, let me go back up. The Civil War picnic. I remember from one of my history classes. At the very first battle of the Civil War, it may or may not have been Bull Run. Like civilians would go to like nearby hills around the battlefield and have like picnics and watch the battle go on. I guess that was the thing. Like they viewed it as some sort of entertainment. But yeah, that actually happened. People like had picnics near that first battle. I don't think that happened in subsequent battles, but that happened. You remember learning that too? Oh, good thing I'm not the only one. Yeah, that's just kind of mind-blowing to me. Like people showing up with like picnic baskets, like, oh, we get front row seats to the battle. How much time do I have left? That one's a little bit long. I want something a bit shorter. Slightly shorter video. Already did Girl Scout cookies. History of brownies. Let's do it.
Given the choice between a brownie and basically anything else, I will always choose the brownie because I love them so much. But I ask, have they always been so frickin' delicious? Well, we can go back to 1904 and make one of the very first recipes for brownies to find out. So thank you to HelloFresh for sponsoring this video as we endeavor to find the origin of brownies, this time on Tasting History. So today I've decided to make one of the oldest recipes for brownies, which seems like it would be a simple task, but it's not so straightforward. See, the very first recipe for something called a brownie is from 1896. And while it's called a brownie, it doesn't have any chocolate. Instead, it has molasses in it. So that's not really what I'm looking for. And the oldest dish that is something that we would call a brownie, made with chocolate, wasn't actually called a brownie. It was made at the Palmer House in Chicago, but it wasn't called a brownie until many years later. So I decided to go with the first recipe that is called a brownie and has chocolate in it, though even then there were two recipes published at the same time that fit the bill, so I just picked one. It comes from the Service Club cookbook published in Chicago, Illinois in 1904, and it's for Bangor brownies. Cream 1/2 cup of butter, 1 cup sugar, add 2 squares, 1/4 cake baker's chocolate, melted, 2 eggs, 1/2 cup pastry flour, and 1/2 cup chopped walnuts. Spread on baking tins and bake 15 minutes in a moderate oven. So already 120 years ago, we have basically all of the ingredients of the modern day brownie. It's just that the ratios are a little bit different. But at least the recipe gives us exact measurements so we can recreate what it would have been like. Except there is one measurement that is a bit of a head scratcher, and that is the 2 squares or 1/4 cake baker's chocolate. Well, how much is a square? Or actually, how much was a square in 1904? Because the Baker Chocolate Company has been around since 1780, and surely during that period of time, the quantities of their packaging have changed. And they have, because when I went to buy Baker's chocolate, which you can still buy today at the store, it came in a 4-ounce package. But in 1904, it came in an 8-ounce package, so we know that a quarter of the cake would have been 2 ounces, and so each square is 1 ounce. So for this recipe, what you'll need is 2 ounces or 57 grams of Baker's unsweetened chocolate. Then a half cup or 115 grams of salted butter, 1 cup or 200 grams of sugar, 2 eggs, a half cup or 60 grams of pastry or all-purpose flour, and a half cup or 60 grams of chopped walnuts. And once you have all of your ingredients measured out, you are ready to start cooking, which is something that I really appreciate from today's sponsor, HelloFresh, because when you get a package from HelloFresh, all of the ingredients are already measured. This recipe says to cream the butter and sugar together. Often today, you melt the butter for brownies, but this has you cream them. Let the butter soften and then begin to beat it until it's nice and smooth, and then add the sugar and mix until it becomes creamy and fluffy. And then we need to melt our chocolate. So you just heat a couple of inches of water in a saucepan to boiling, and then set the chocolate in a heat-safe bowl on top of the pot, making sure that the bottom isn't actually touching the water. As it melts, give it a couple stirs, and it should be ready in a couple minutes. Then pour that into the creamed butter and mix. And you want to mix for a minute or two to make sure that everything is well incorporated, but also to let the chocolate cool, because once you add the egg, if it is still hot, it will scramble the egg, and that's no good. So after a couple minutes, add the eggs and mix until they're fully incorporated, and then you can add half of the flour and gently mix it in, then add the other half and continue to mix. And once everything is mixed together, stir in your walnuts, then your batter is ready, and you can butter and line an 8 by 8 inch baking pan with parchment and pour the batter in, making sure it spreads into the corners evenly. Then set the pan in the oven at 350 degrees Fahrenheit, 175 Celsius for 20 minutes. The recipe says for 15 minutes, but I checked on mine at 15 minutes and it was still pretty much liquid on the inside. You don't want to over-bake them though. You don't want, when you put a knife in and pull it out, you don't want it to be dry. You want kind of a gooiness to come out, but it shouldn't be liquid. Once they're ready, set them on a wire rack to cool for 5 minutes, then turn out the brownies and let them cool completely before cutting them into squares. Now, like I said, this is one of the oldest recipes that is actually called a brownie that has chocolate. But a decade before this, another chocolatey, fudgy treat made its debut at the Chicago World's Fair.
Time for history.
The year is 1893, and Chicago is playing host to the White City, home of the world's Columbian Exposition. Here you will marvel at the debut of George Ferris's Great Wheel, and you can tantalize your taste buds with new inventions like Juicy Fruit Gum and Pabst Blue Ribbon Beer. And for a select few, they would get to try a square of chocolatey, fudgy goodness that was not yet called a brownie. So if you ever visit the massive Palmer House Hotel in Chicago, which I did last year, and it is pretty spectacular, you will be inundated with stories of the first brownie being made at the Palmer House, and it is still made there today, and you can actually order it. And I ordered it and ate it, and it was delicious. Not really a brownie the way that I would usually get it. It was much more dense, much more chocolatey, but still really, really good. So their claim that they invented it actually begins with the socialite and businesswoman Bertha Honoré Palmer, a woman described as beautiful, dashing, quick, and smart, and more than that, she was sure of herself. So it's no wonder that in 1891 she was selected to lead the board of lady managers for the upcoming World's Columbian Exposition, the World's Fair. These ladies were to oversee the construction of the Woman's Building and organize the World's Congress of Representative Women. This building was planned, designed, and decorated entirely by women, something rather unheard of at the time, and it was said that it will be a long time before such an aggregation of woman's work, as may now be seen in the Woman's Building, can be gathered from all parts of the world again. It's also worth noting that of the 12 main buildings at the exposition, the one entrusted to the Board of Lady Managers was the first to actually get constructed, no doubt due to the efficacy of one Bertha Honoré Palmer. But what does this have to do with brownies, you say? Well, the story goes that during their meetings, they wanted to have meals, but Bertha didn't want them taking away time to have a full meal brought in with servants and yada yada yada. So she asked her staff, her kitchen staff at the Palmer Hotel, to put together a box lunch for the ladies, and this would need to include a dessert that was smaller than a piece of cake and wouldn't require a fork to be eaten. Thus born was the Palmer House brownie. It was a dense, chocolatey square topped with an apricot glaze and walnuts. And it was such a hit that it was not only served to the occasional guest of the World's Fair, but also to those who visited the Palmer House, where it is still served to their guests today. Now, this is the story that is told by the Palmer House today, and I have no reason to believe that it's not true, but I couldn't find any, period documentation that confirmed it, but still, great story. And they will actually give you the recipe for this brownie. But they say that it hasn't changed and it is the original recipe. But it is definitely not the original recipe because it's written in a very modernized format, so who knows how it's changed. Maybe it hasn't changed at all, but knowing how recipes work over 130 years, I'm pretty sure it's probably changed in some way. So I decided not to make that one. I decided to go with the one from 1904 that we're making today. Also, that original Palmer House brownie was definitely not called a brownie. So where did the term come from? Well, it turns out in the late 1800s, the word brownie was everywhere. It was a really big thing, probably because of a book published in 1887 by Canadian author Palmer Cox. The book was called The Brownies, Their Book. And it was all about these little fairy-like goblins who come out at night in people's homes and sometimes help with the chores, and at other times play little pranks on them. These brownies were actually a part of Scottish folklore, and they went back for centuries, but Palmer's book gave them a new jolt of popularity, especially here in North America. One thing to know about these brownies is that basically they did work around the house. They were like little elves, little house elves, and if you ever wanted to get rid of one, you did so by giving it clothes. Seems familiar, yeah?
Ah, sounds familiar indeed. There's also a type of camera called brownies. Honestly, I never really thought about the origin of the name brownies. I just, oh hey, brownies, you eat it. You never really think about, where the name comes from, where it comes from. It's like, you have a brownie, you eat it. What else do you do with it? And he says it comes from Scottish folklore. And you-know-who is English, so I guess she had, something to go off of.
Specifically, the clothes were called a brownie suit, and they became very popular with young boys at the time. In the 1897 Sears Roebuck catalog, there's an ad for brownie suits for children. Just the thing for a boy's everyday go-as-you-please suit. Our brownie suits will delight your boy. They are worn everywhere this season. Our price per suit, 50 cents. Also, I love looking at these old catalogs. Just the pictures alone are amazing. Look at these fancy little lads. I will put a link to where you can look at the whole catalog down in the description. It could take you hours. Another thing to know about these brownies is that, yes, while they did help out with chores from time to time, they also had a habit of stealing things, specifically keys. They might take your keys, and the only way to get those keys back was to leave a little treat, a little piece of cake or candy for the brownie. And this was called brownie's food. And it is perhaps the inspiration for the name of a confection sold in that same 1897 edition of the Sears Roebuck catalog, where they are listed under fancy crackers, biscuits, etc., and were sold in 1-pound papers for 14 cents. The first brownie that we do know what was actually in the recipe is from Fannie Farmer's original 1896 Boston Cooking School cookbook. But while it bears the name of the brownie and is cake-like, it's made not with chocolate, but with molasses. And so the question is, did it get the name brownie from these sprites, these little fairies, or was it just because it was brown? Or maybe it was a little bit of both. Who knows? It's a little more clear for a later recipe from 1899, where the Macias cookbook has a recipe for brownies food, clearly named after the characters. And here I feel like we are getting closer to what we would call a brownie today, because instead of molasses, it gets its color and flavor from chocolate. But the chocolate is not part of the cake, rather it is a plain cake layered with chocolate ganache and a creamy frosting on top. The next time we see an evolution in brownie technology, it is in 1904 with the recipe that we're making today, and this is where we get to the second origin story for the brownie. Supposedly, it was in Bangor, Maine, and there was a housewife who was making a chocolate cake, but she forgot to put in the baking powder, and so when it came out of the oven, it was just flat, gooey, chocolatey goodness. But if you're actually just forgetting the baking powder, that is not how that would turn out, because all the other ratios of ingredients are totally off. You would just end up with a very flat cake. But still, maybe the story has some merit. And I say that because this is not the only brownie that is called the Bangor brownie. There were a lot of different brownies during this time period that had the moniker of Bangor brownie. Also, I had to look up how to say that word, Bangor, because I've heard it banger before, but I was like, I want to see how people from Bangor say it. And so I ended up finding this wonderful video on YouTube from Bangor, Maine, that is like a public service announcement in the form of song explaining that it is pronounced Bangor, not banger. It's really, really good. You should watch it because the song is a banger. Anyway, over the years, brownies started to kind of become the same thing. And it is the Bangor brownie style that we see evolving into the 1920s and 30s and beyond, even to today. Really, the only thing that would ever change is the ratios of the different ingredients. Once in a while, you see these recipe outliers that add other things. Like
All right. Hydrating now. One moment, please. Also, 50 cents for a suit. I think that was like a children's suit, but yeah. That is ridiculous.
there's the cream cheese brownie, and some of them I saw had cherries in them from one period. There is a 1926 recipe that has raisins. I love raisins, but I think putting raisins in a brownie should be punishable by at least some time in prison. But overall, brownies haven't really changed all that much. I know Katharine Hepburn had a recipe for brownies where she just cut the flour to like less than a quarter of a cup, and she said that made them super gooey, and now you can make them with a shiny top in different ways. I think that's mostly by melting the butter. It helps to do that. Variations, but essentially a brownie is a brownie is a brownie, and we're going to see if that's always been the case by trying these 1904 brownies. And here we are, the first recipe for chocolate brownies. So they smell like brownies. They look like brownies, though not as dark as the brownie that I would prefer, but I've seen brownies this color before. Very dull top. It is cracked like a modern brownie. Very dull top, it doesn't have that shininess. But everything else looks the same. Let's give it a try. I love brownies so much, you guys. I don't know how to express my adoration for this food. Even the worst brownie I've ever had, haven't had one with raisins, but every other brownie, even when it's really cakey, which is not my favorite, I still freaking love them. I like a more gooey, like fudgy brownie. And this is more along those lines. It's not as gooey as some today, but it's dense without being too heavy. It is chewy. It is chocolatey, more chocolatey than I expected given the amount of chocolate in it. I would probably add another square, personally, but this is a brownie. It really hasn't changed much in 120 years. I'm very, very happy with them, and I will be eating all of them probably tonight. I need to go buy some milk because I can't eat them without milk. They're just so good. So make these brownies. Go buy some brownies. Do whatever you have to do to get some brownies in your life, because life is better with brownies. And I will see you next time on Tasting History.
Well, you heard him. Go get some brownies now. It is demanded of you. And also agreed, no raisins in brownies. Alrighty, but yeah. That's gonna be all from me for today. Thank you everyone for stopping by. Hope y'all had fun. I know I did. But yeah, thanks for being here. Thank you to anyone watching the VOD, and thank you as always to lovely fortune tellers watching this before I stream. Let me see who's on so I can raid. No one but the big shots. I don't suppose you have any suggestions, Michael? Okay, let's go say hi to her. Pal World, huh? Haven't played it myself. But let's go say hi. Oh, alright. But yeah, thanks once again for stopping by. Remember to hydrate, rest up, eat tasty things, all of that good jazz, and peace.